for bringing us together today. My name is Jordan Garcia. I'm the Director of Programs at the American Friends Service Committee. And I'm honored to act as moderator for this forum with my colleague Bianca Williams. And as moderators, Bianca and I will allow for each candidate equal time to address each of the questions and be aware that the organizing body is not endorsing any of the candidates as a result of this educational forum. Afterwards, we will invite questions from the community. We ask that you refrain from commentary, but rather craft your own questions for clarity and deeper understanding.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Helen Morgan. I am proud to be a resident of Denver, and I was proud to walk this morning in the Martin Luther King Jr. Parade, not as a politician, but at the back of the crowd with everybody else. I have been in the Denver District Attorney's Office for 21 years. I have spent each and every one of those years trying to do justice for this community and the people I work with. I know what race means in Denver and in Colorado, and no more acutely so when I spent 5 years of my career prosecuting a white supremacist prison gang known as the 211 Crew. I have seen when our system can do good, such as when we respond to people's desperate needs for addiction and mental health treatment by providing that. I have seen when we fail by hurrying to felonize young people, depriving them of the opportunity for a future of working and enjoying life. I look forward today to introducing myself to so many people I have not met, and to telling you how I want to walk forward with you to make Denver a better place. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for tuning in.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for being here. And I want to thank the Denver Justice Project for hosting this. This is an important discussion that our community should be having. I'm running for Denver District Attorney because I love this city. I grew up here. My wife and kids who are in the back, we're raising our kids here. Simply put, Denver is my home. As a Deputy District Attorney for the past 8.5 years, I've worked every day to keep our community safe for our families, and I will continue to do so. During my career, I have prosecuted cases in every single unit of the Denver District Attorney's Office. I've received numerous letters of commendation for my work, and in 2014 I was awarded the Denver District Attorney's Meritorious Service Award for my work in a homicide that was related to domestic violence. There are so many great things that we get to do in our office. The Denver DA's office was one of the first in the nation to start a drug court program. We are nationally recognized in our advocacy for victims' rights, and we have a world-renowned crime lab. But I know there is so much more we can do. And on day one, I will begin instituting a fact-finding review on cases where anyone dies at the hands of police, because I think it's important to open up the transparency on those cases so everybody knows exactly why we're making the decisions that we're making. I'm going to devote my time to easing this growing tension between our community and law enforcement, and I'm going to make a strong commitment to bring a more thoughtful approach to mental health. It is so critical going forward, how we treat the mental health in our city. Finally, I believe very strongly that we have to keep politics out of the Denver District Attorney's office. The time is now to move forward. The time that this election is about the future of public safety in our city, one in which it's devoid of politics, and one where the new generation of prosecutors are stepping up at this critical moment to take on the challenges. Thank you.
My name is Michael Carey, and I'm running for Denver DA because things have to change. We in America are leading the world in incarcerating our citizens, and that has to change. We in Colorado have 4% of our population are African Americans, and 19% of our prison population is African American, and that has to change. Latinos make up 19% of our population and over a third of our prisons. That has to change. When minorities make up less than half of Denver's population and 80% of the homicide victims last year, that has to change. I'm in this race because things have to change, and that's why I'm running. I'm running as a former prosecutor. I'm running as someone who has practiced criminal defense. I'm running as someone who has led the fight to make sure the University of Colorado is diverse and inclusive and creates the same opportunity. The opportunity that we ought to be creating in our criminal justice system. So young people who make mistakes get a second chance rather than put on the way to prison. And another thing that has to change, this country has to stop using the death penalty. And I am the only candidate running who is pledging to never seek the death penalty. It doesn't keep us safe, it doesn't deter anyone, and we should not be trying to kill our own citizens. As an elected DA, I will reach out to every part of our community so they feel like they are part of our criminal justice system. Because only then can we have one that we can all be proud of. And I need your help to win this final race because things have to change.
So I am Beth McCann, and we are here today to celebrate the life of Dr. Martin Luther King, who led us so far forward in our fight for civil rights. But we also know that we have a lot more to do. We deserve and expect justice and fairness in our court system. And people say to me, this system is too entrenched, it's too complex, you can't possibly change it. Well, I don't buy that. I took on the NRA when we passed significant gun control legislation in our state legislature 2 years ago. We are a leader nationally in our gun safety laws. I also took on the big banks and spent 3 years getting a bill passed to provide fairness for people who were facing the loss of their homes in our system. And finally, I took on the district attorneys when I passed a bill that gives due process to kids who are facing charges as adults in our system. I don't just talk about it, I've done it and I will do it. So what do I want to do with the DA's office? It is time for a new direction in our DA's office, and I'm uniquely qualified to lead that effort forward. I have prosecuted the law, I have supervised and trained lawyers, and I have made the law. There is no one else in this race that can say that. And my goals are to, first and foremost, address this issue of the tension and unrest between law enforcement and our police department community. Secondly, we must improve our juvenile justice system so we are not jailing so many kids. And we must address mass incarceration. We must address mass incarceration of particularly people of color in our system. And fourth, I will prioritize crimes that put our families at risk. With your support, I will be the district attorney that will bring justice for all. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Awesome. I feel like I kind of lost my voice after that exciting parade. I'm going to try to speak as loud, and I'm also from the Bronx originally, so I speak really fast. So I'm going to slow down. So we're going to start with the first question. If you need to see the questions, if you need to read them, you can just move over here, and they'll be projected up here. Okay? So candidates, you have 2 minutes. The timekeepers are ready to hear. All right. And we're going to start from left to right. Okay? In 2014, the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office formed a conviction review unit tasked with reviewing and investigating cases of convicted citizens who claim to be innocent. In just under 2 years, it has exonerated 17 people who were wrongfully convicted of crimes they did not commit. As Denver District Attorney, would you seek to replicate this review unit model for wrongful convictions? Additionally, would you consider tasking this unit with reviewing controversial, non-indictment decisions in local cases of police misconduct, excessive force, and/or homicide?
So I'll start. Yes, I'm very interested in replicating this effort to see if we have people who've been convicted in Denver who in fact are innocent. And we actually have an example of that going on right now in Denver. Some of you may be familiar with the Clarence L. Moses case, where we have a gentleman who was in prison for 26 years, the entire time claiming that he was innocent. And in fact, he raised money from other fellow inmates in order to test the evidence for DNA because he was convinced that the DNA would prove that he was innocent. This district attorney, our current district attorney, fought his effort to have a new trial. I would not have fought that effort, and now he currently has been released by a judge who says he is entitled to a new trial. And that was a judge who was a former district attorney, actually. And she indicated that he should be released, awaiting the decision by the DA's office. The DA's office has not yet come out with a decision about whether to retry this man. I would not retry Clarence L. Moses. So I am very committed to making sure that when we do convict people, we are convicting people who are guilty, not people who are innocent. And I applaud the use of our DNA efforts to exonerate folks who in fact are not guilty of the crimes for which they are accused. So, thank you.
The worst thing the DA can do is keep someone in prison who's innocent. And that means you need to have a robust unit and opportunity to investigate post-conviction remedies. Because not only is it unjust to that person, but that means you have another perpetrator out there. And that is a danger to all of us. So absolutely, we need a program, a DA's office that will embrace and welcome, where it's justified, the reviews of convictions to make sure we are not keeping innocent people in prison. And like the Clarence Moses Cell case, I also would not seek a retrial in that case where the evidence is so strong that doubt his guilt. And you actually had someone else come forward and acknowledge to engaging in the conduct in question. But there's also, we need to use best practices to make sure we're not convicting the innocent to begin with. And the New Yorker just had a lengthy article about how flawed witness ID can be. And we need to use the best practices and partner with the police department to make sure that innocent people are not put on trial to begin with. Now there's a second part to this question that I want to answer as well, which is how do we improve the decision to not charge high-profile cases? And I think that deserves an answer as well. And in my view, that means we need much greater transparency than we have right now, where we have a district attorney in a case shooting, issues a report and says, take it or leave it, that's my position. Clarence Booker died in Denver County Jail in 2010. And as the candidates know, we're still getting questions about it, because the public doesn't understand how that decision is made. If I'm DA, you'll understand the decisions I'm making. And then we can work together to bring justice to our city conviction systems and all the rest.
This is a critical issue, and it's one that you have to understand when you're sitting in our position as Morgan and I are as district attorneys. What does it mean to have a review process? It means that you review the case, you review the transcripts, you review the files, you review the transcripts from the original investigation, and you make a determination as to whether or not somebody is guilty or not guilty, or whether or not you can prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt. I've been following what they've done in Brooklyn. I think it's a great idea. Denver's already been doing that with DNA cases through the Denver Justice Project, which was a collaboration with the Attorney General's office to review cases through DNA to make sure we're convicting the right folks. That process can easily be extended. But it's important to understand with regard to Moses L. is that I can't tell you sitting here whether I would retry Moses L. or not, and I'll tell you why. Because I have not reviewed the case. I haven't looked at the file, I haven't read the transcripts, and I haven't met the victim. And that is what you have to do. When we talk about reviewing controversial cases, that's what the review is. It's not hearing it in the newspaper, then making an opinion about it or a decision about it. It's going through the tough work and doing it. Now, the second part of this question is reviewing controversial cases. I'm in favor of a public fact-finding review when anyone dies at the hands of police. That means if I don't file charges in that case, we are going to have a public fact-finding review in a public forum, and people are going to be able to ask questions, why didn't that happen? And that's what I'm committed to bringing to Denver.
It's really hard to answer this question in 2 minutes, and I'm going to do my best. Let me start with the first issue of wrongful convictions. As Kenneth said, we in fact had a program in our office that was grant funded that looked at DNA evidence in cases, and people could submit cases where they felt that they were wrongfully accused and later convicted, and we would test those within a certain guidelines that we had. Unfortunately, we lost funding for that. So when we make promises about creating new units, I want to be honest with folks. We have the same resource issues that other people do. So if this is a program that the community wants and the community needs to work with us, then I'd be delighted to set it up. But this is going to take a lot of time and resources, so we've got to do it together. As to the second issue of reviewing controversial issues, in indictments and non-indictments, I would do that prior to making the decision about indictment. There are two separate issues here, right? There's the issue of when somebody is accused of mistreating a citizen, somebody in Denver, and whether or not that person suffered injury or serious bodily injury. I would, as I have explained to people, create a panel called the double refusal, which is not one person, but two people, uninfluenced by each other, make a determination of whether or not somebody should be charged. There is also a place for independent review prior to a decision being made on the issue of police shootings. We have lost your trust. That's why you're here. We need to make the decision, but we also need eyes that people understand are not beholden to anyone.
Access to community-based services prior to an arrest or trial, a process as pre-booking diversion or law enforcement assisted diversion, commonly called LEAD, and why or why not?
Yes, I would definitely support such a program. One of the most troubling things about our criminal justice system currently is that we've become a repository for people with substance abuse addictions and mental health problems. And that is not the appropriate role for jails. And even our jailers, our sheriffs, will tell you they are not equipped to really handle people who have these mental health, and often it's codependent mental health and substance abuse issues. One of our biggest challenges is figuring out how to keep those people out of our prison system, and where do we get the resources to do that. So in the legislature, a couple of years ago, we worked very hard to put additional funding into our mental health system here in Colorado. And we set up crisis centers throughout the state that do provide 24/7 crisis interventions for people with mental health issues. We put $20 million into it. And we just, the committee that I'm chair of, the health committee, just got a report about the usage of those crisis centers. And it has been remarkable how many people are actually using the centers and also using the hotline. We now have a 24/7 hotline. Those are the kinds of efforts that we really need to be providing for our citizenry. I heard when I was working on this issue from many families who have, particularly adult children, who are drug dependent or alcohol dependent or have psychological issues, about the fact that there was nowhere for them to take their children and they ended up having to call the police. We as a community really need to take a look at this and put some resources into helping those who have these kinds of substance abuse and addiction problems. So I'm very much in favor of pre-booking programs to help divert those people out of our system.
For far too long, this country has tried to wrest its way out of drug addiction. For far too long, we've tried to wrest our way out of people with mental health problems and put them not in hospitals, but put them in jail. And that has to change. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running. That has to change. And one wonderful tool is LEAD programs, where with the right cases, those officers are trained on how to handle people with mental health, with substance abuse, and get them out of the criminal justice system and into a treatment program. That's what we need to do. And that will save us money, and that will make us a better moral society. But so much of it is about the fact that we are not training our police officers and our sheriff's deputies on how to deal with mental health. What's the point of having a special mental health unit in every county jail if the deputies aren't given training on how to handle the people in that jail? And this is where so many of the tragedies are occurring. Michael Marshall was in the Denver County Jail and left on a stretcher. He was there for a $100 bond, people. $100 bond. And that's what we have to change. We need to address how we address the criminal justice system and the use of bond and who we're putting in jail and why we're there. And LEAD is an important tool to make sure we change that system.
So this is something I believe I read that Longmont Police Department has started doing, diverting people before the booking process, and I think it's absolutely critical. Here's the thing that I would want to make sure. I would want to make sure that those folks who are suffering from mental illness, who are suffering from addiction, who don't belong in jail, and make no mistake, the Denver County Jail is the #1 mental health facility in the city and county of Denver. That's because we have not put in place structures for people to go. And that's wrong. And before we start making these critical decisions about taking people out of the booking process and putting them somewhere, we have to commit. And the time is now. You can make, I will absolutely use this as a bully pulpit to make sure people are doing what has to be done in order for us to make this decision, release them out into the community, to make sure that they have the support that they need when they get out. Because that's been the problem. We're releasing a lot of folks right now with the Denver bond process, and we're going to talk about that, with very little to no support. And that's just wrong, because these are the people who need it the most. And yet, as a community, we look to the DA's office and say, well, let them out, let them out. And I'm going to say, absolutely let them out. And now let's see what we can all do together to make sure they have the support so they don't come back.
For far too long, we have used a criminal justice model to address the issues of addiction and mental health, and we need to move to a public health model. I have been doing that since we reformulated drug court in 2007, and by no means is that a panacea, but it's a start. We need to understand that the services that we provide to people with mental illness and addiction issues in this state are appalling. Each and every one of us should be ashamed of the fact that if you have a dual diagnosis in this state, there is one program that is a long-term program that you don't have to pay for, and the waiting list is 11 months. So when we go to the state legislature, it's not enough to say, I want to change this bill or I want to change that bill. You have to say, what is your real commitment? Let's talk about that issue of, do you want diversion programs? Pre-arrest diversion. Here are 5 areas, there's strategic intercepts, that the people across the nation are talking about when we intercept in people's lives. And that first intercept is the issue of arrest. Right now, when you call 911, you have 3 options. You have the option to call the police, you have the option to call fire, and you have the option to call paramedics. You don't have the option to call mental health professionals. Police always have to get involved. Why is that? Because it's the way we've always done it. We can do it differently and we can do it better. So yes, do I support officers being able to take somebody pre-charging to a facility? Absolutely. But I'm challenging the fact that we don't need officers involved, because they've got better things to do. So that's what I want.
As we move into the next question, we're going to start from right to left, and then I'll keep it exciting later on for all of us. So the next question is, in the Black Lives Matter movement in Denver and across the country, millions are using Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, to understand the role racism plays in mass incarceration and to reimagine the criminal justice system. How do you intend to address structural racism within the justice system in relation to mass incarceration? Again, we're emphasizing structural racism. How do you intend to address this?
I will admit that I talked to Bianca beforehand and said our homework was to read the book, and I am not a great fan of homework. But I don't know that I have more enjoyed a book talking about this issue ever. Or maybe I said it to you, I'm sorry. But I really did. So let's talk about structural racism. The first thing we have to do is our office has to reflect the community, right? Because if we don't reflect the community, if we are not within our office talking to people who have different life experiences, we are not going to succeed. We also have, and I do have a quote that I want to read, that talks about what our response should be to people involved in the criminal justice system. And what it says is, we could choose to be a nation that extends care, compassion, and concern to those who are locked up or locked out or headed for prison before they are old enough to vote. We could seek for them the same opportunities we seek for our own children, and we could treat them like one of us. Or we could choose to be a nation that shames and blames its most vulnerable, affixes badges of dishonor, and relegates them to permanent second-class status for life. We have to understand that when people come into our system, we have the opportunity to give them life and to support them and give them the resources that they need, or we have the opportunity to condemn them to being second-class citizens. So how does that change? It means education. It means looking deeply within ourselves and understanding who is in our system, why they are there, and educating the people that work with them. So that when we use that broad, and some people have described it as awesome decision-making process, we do it fairly.
Well, the number one thing is you have to keep politics out of the DA's office. This was an incredibly powerful book to read. I was moved by it. It made me rethink what I do for a living, because it challenged everything that we do for a living. And let me tell you, the one theme out of this book is how politics corrupted the criminal justice system for its own good. Politicians used this system, they created it, and they perpetuated it depending on what they wanted to get out of it. And that has to stop. I'm not a politician, I'm a prosecutor. I'm here because this is what I've chosen to do with my life's work. Now, on page 233, the one thing Michelle doesn't do is she doesn't give us the answers of how you solve this incredibly complex problem. But on page 233, if you look, she gives us 15 ways in which we can start to address the structural problems of this. And I think there are ones that we can absolutely do on day one in the Denver District Attorney's Office, and I'm committing to you today that I'm going to do it. Federal grant money for drug enforcement must end. I am absolutely committed to reviewing all of our grant programs to make sure we aren't perpetuating the problem because of a need for federal dollars in the DA's office. Drug forfeiture laws must be stripped from the books. I am in the economic crime unit. We handle the forfeiture laws for our city, and I want to make sure that the number one thing we do is we are not taking money and vehicles and all of that from folks who aren't even convicted of a crime. That is wrong, and we do not do this. Racial profiling must be eradicated, and I will train our deputies on implicit bias. It is time for us to have that training. Data collection for police and prosecutors must be mandated. The time is now for the DA's office. I'm going to commission a study to see what it is we're doing. Why are we charging people and what are we doing with those cases? The time is now to do that.
This issue of the racial equity in our criminal justice system isn't new to me. I didn't have to read a book to find out about it. I grew up around it. You see, my father was Judge Jim Carey, and he was one of the first federal judges to talk about the inequity of crack cocaine and powder cocaine sentences. Judge Carey, he was called out to the Supreme Court on the sentencing guidelines that forced him, and he ruled were unconstitutional until he got overturned by Scalia and his friends, about how unfair and racist it was to send someone from Park Hill to prison for 10 years and someone from Aspen who had powder cocaine could get probation. So that's not new to me. It's a powerful book, but I didn't have to read a book to know how broken our system is. And we have people say, oh, politicians can't change it. And I'm not a politician. I've never been elected to a paying elected office in my life. But what we have heard, some people who are part of the system, and they're telling what they will do. What have they done? What have they done? I'll tell you what I've done. I've been fighting for equity at our flagship university for the last 11 years. And under my leadership, CU Denver's Latino enrollment has doubled. That's the record I'm running on. That's a change, because until we have people who are ready to take on the system, who are not part of the system, that's the ones who will change it. And I will change it through making sure that we are tracking the racial identity throughout our criminal justice system so we know where the problems are. Make sure that we're hiring deputies that are culturally competent and know what the difference is and how their experiences are affecting their decisions. Because only then will a powerful position of prosecutor make sure that that position is used, applied equally to all of our citizens.
In our criminal justice system is really challenging and pervasive, and it is something that we really cannot tolerate as a community. I read the new Jim Crow last summer as I was beginning campaigning for this position, and it really does discuss sort of the development of how our criminal justice system has preyed upon people of color, particularly with respect to the drug enforcement, and the fact that the federal government was encouraging law enforcement and DA's offices to enforce and prosecute drug offenses has really led to this overpopulation, particularly of young men of color in our prison systems, which then is a perpetual cycle of continual I guess, taking advantage of, because then they are not in their families, they're not working, and the whole cultural structure begins to fall apart. So structural racism, to me, is sort of that same vicious kind of cycle that once you get into it, it's very difficult for people to get out of it. So a couple of things that I will definitely do as the DA. One is, as I mentioned, we need to stop incarcerating so many of our young people. We need to have alternatives for them that will help us keep them in the community, keep them being productive citizens. We also, in the office, need to be studying the issue of implicit bias. need to find out at those stages where the DA's office has that discretion. Are we going to charge? What are we going to charge? What kind of plea bargain are we going to offer? And I'm almost out of my time, but what kind of sentencing are we going to offer? Those are all areas where bias can enter in, and I will make sure that we address it.
A full 50% of those being held in Denver jails are awaiting trial and have not been convicted of a crime. The data also shows that a large portion of those inmates are being held on a bond that is less than $1,000, according to allowing us to reasonably infer that they are only there because they can't afford to pay bail. This process, especially for the poor, can often result in a loss of employment, income, housing, and child care. These only compound their predicament. As Denver's DA, how would you advocate that Denver change its monetary bail system that disparately impacts the poor and communities of color to decrease our pretrial jail population?
So, many years ago, Denver embarked on a new system of looking at bail. We now use a risk scoring system called the CPAC, which looks at somebody's risk of reoffending. And we also are now starting to use, for domestic violence offenders, something that's called ODARA, and that looks at risk of recidivism. Those should be what we are looking at when we consider whether somebody is held or not held. The risk to the public, not the dollar in your pocket. The ultimate goal is to have a system of what we call bail or no bail. If you're at risk to reoffend, if you're going to hurt the domestic violence partner that you have just spent the last 3 or 4 years abusing, you should be held. If you're not, then you shouldn't be. It should not be about money. It has been about money for too long. So as Denver DA, I would continue the risk assessments that we do and move to a place where if you are not a public safety risk, you do not spend your time and my money in our jail.
So a bond statute was passed a few years ago that was restructured the way it was that we did bond. And what they tried to do in the legislature was model what they've been doing down, basically that started out in New Jersey, which was we're not going to use monetary bonds to hold as the mechanism to hold people. Like Helen said, you move to a system of bond or no bond. And you're looking at, are they two important things with bond? Are they going to come to court? Because that's very important, obviously. And number two, what is the risk of safety? Now, Representative McCann was in the legislature and passed this statute, and she didn't get it right. Because what they did was, they gave a mechanism to allow folks to get out, but they did not give us a mechanism to hold those people when we need them. We are still using monetary bonds to hold people in the Denver County Jail because there is no way to hold a rapist or a murderer or somebody like that without using a monetary bond. And it's not fair because Helen and I have both seen the rich white man walk out of the Denver County Jail because he could post a $100,000 bond, while the $5,000 bond person who's being held there for breaking into a car sat for a long time. You have to have experience when you implement these types of programs. I am absolutely in favor of using evidence-based practices, risk-based type, the deal that we're doing, I'm in favor of doing it, but we have to be smart about how we do it. We have to take into consideration things like, are they committing another crime while they've already been out on bond, which is not something that they take into consideration right now. And that's wrong. That hurts public safety to not consider those types of things. We have to be smart about the way we approach these things. Experience matters. I do it every day. I'm in court, we're talking bond, we're looking at the CPATs and trying to assess whether or not someone's going to come to court and what risk they place to the overall safety of the community.
So I'm the only one on stage who's representing someone who's been arrested. I'm the only one on stage who's representing someone who's innocent who's been arrested. I've had clients who've been arrested for things they didn't do. So I understand that power. And I understand the consequences of the monetary bond system, where we are using what is essentially an 18th century system. You're rich, you're not a threat. You're poor, you are. And that has to change. And again, the smart $100 bond, and he leaves on a journey. And that's going to cost the city of Denver, unfortunately, a lot more than $100. Now, what do? First of all, we continue the use of the smart pretrial system to assess people who are at risk. We use modern supervision, modern systems to make sure we are keeping our community safe without putting too many people in the jail. Let me give you a simple example of something that I'm talking about. How many of you, raise your hand if you get a reminder when you have a dentist or doctor? Every hand goes up, right? Well, we have a program here in Denver that's so much in courtrooms. 5DA, everyone who gets a ticket in Denver, everyone bonds out, checks the box, gives their mobile number, and checks the date, and sends it in text message. So if you have a court date on Wednesday, you get a text reminder on Monday. And when people get reminders, they are much more likely to show up for the court date, so we won't have people missing court dates and then having to postpone. Douglas County is doing this right now. Boulder is doing this. Douglas County says they've reduced their fail to appear rate by 50%. And my view is, when people miss court and they're kept in jail for 30 days, 45 days, and finally get their case resolved, much more likely to be a guilty plea in that case. We are no safer when they've lost their apartment, their family system, and they come out and they're homeless and unemployed. We are not safer.
So I beg to differ with Mr. Boyd about the fact that we did address some of this issue in the legislature, because what we did was make the system fairer to people who cannot afford to make a bond. And we also passed a bill that Representative Salazar mentioned, which I supported, which eliminated this concept of debtor's prison, that people who have been fined for an offense, if they can't pay it, they go to jail. So to me, that is not right. The fact that you're poor does not mean that you should spend more time in jail than someone who's able to afford to pay a fine or to pay for bond. So we have addressed it in the legislature, and I will continue to address it as the district attorney. The judges make the ultimate decision, but we, as the DAs, present to the judge what our recommendations are for bonding. And it is not to be used to keep people in jail just because they can't afford the bond, which is precisely what happened to Michael Marshall. And the fact that he was in jail for a $100 bond and was killed in jail is outrageous. It is not acceptable, and we don't have a decision yet of how that case is going to proceed. But we all need to be paying attention to how that case is going to be handled. So it's a big issue that I have already worked on and will continue to work on as your next DA.
We've been talking a lot about culture and structure. And for the next session, we'll start with Mike Kerrigan and Laura Watson. All right, so a recent study by Harvard epidemiologists declared that police killings are so frequent that they should be considered a critical public health issue in the U.S. On a local level, it was recently reported that the CDC statistics from 2014 show that Denver County had the second highest rate of law enforcement related deaths in the nation after Baltimore. However, the Denver DA's office has not indicted any law enforcement personnel for felony excessive force or homicide since 1992. Many have alleged that these shocking levels of citizens being harmed by law enforcement are the result of a culture of violence that has been allowed to go unchecked. If elected DA, would you see it as part of your job to address the culture of violence in law enforcement? And if so, how would you approach that challenge?
This is one of the most critical issues facing Denver as it'll choose its next DA. I've been going out to neighborhood meetings across our city, knocking on doors. And people always want to talk about, what are you going to do? Because the public is losing faith in in the police department. And the DA is a critical role in that. The DA is the only elected public safety official in this state, in the city. And that means it's an important bully pulpit to talk about these issues. And what we need to do is make sure that our officers are properly trained. Trained not only on how to use force, but how to de-escalate. So often, the most powerful tool an officer has is words. To calm the situation down. When you think of the situation on Staten Island, a bunch of officers swarming around a man who's selling loose cigarettes. What if one of those officers could say, hey, everybody take a step back, let's just talk about this. We just need to issue a citation, we don't have to take it to the ground, talk about it. That's what we need to train our officers to do. That force has to be used to protect yourselves and the public at times, but only as a last resort. And it's about the training so that we have critical response incident teams responding with the officers to those situations of mental illness. The situation where people are trying to harm themselves. And then the public can work together and with the DA on the side to rebuild confidence in the Denver Police Department.
All right. So this is one of the biggest issues that we're facing in this city. There is a definite lack of trust, particularly among communities of color, with our law enforcement officers. And law enforcement officers must be held accountable, just like everyone else is held accountable. I have actually prosecuted, convicted, and sent to prison a Denver police officer. I'm the only one in this place that has done that. So if it needs to be done, I will do it. I do think we also need to give our officers more tools in how to de-escalate situations so that they have training that will help them understand when someone is in a psychotic breakdown or someone is suffering from mental health issues, how to address that. And this can be done. The majority of our police officers are in it for the right reasons. They never draw their weapons. They are able to use other options when they're confronted with these tough situations. And I have a great deal of respect for them. But we must weed out the ones who are unable to control their own abilities when confronted with tough situations and learn to use, we need to help them learn to use less than lethal force to address these very difficult and challenging situations. But they must be held accountable just as all of us are held accountable. Let's talk about what the DA does in relationship to law enforcement. I've been a DA, as I said, or maybe not said yet, for 21 years. Our role in interacting with the Denver Police Department is not necessarily in the training that folks are talking about. We don't set the curriculum. We teach at the academy, but we don't set the curriculum. What we do is we make decisions whether or not to charge. And then we also interact on a daily basis with people, either accepting cases or not accepting cases, and also in advanced training. Each Denver police officer is required to go through 40 hours of critical incident training, and they do. So people do get trained. And I also think that Denver police officers want, on occasions, to do all you want about giving more training, but that's not what's really the point. The point is having a relationship with the police department. Because I've said no to the Denver Police Department more than anybody else that understands you will make a decision based on the facts, will not shy away from making a judgment, but will also support excellent policing. And that goes back to that issue, just as we're talking about responses, those critical intercepts. When someone is having a mental health breakdown, is it the police who need to respond, or is it somebody else? Because they don't always have to be there. We can do a lot, but
talk about accountability, the DA's office has to hold everyone accountable. It's not just about holding the police accountable. It's about holding politicians, regular day folks, everybody. And there's one standard that we use in the DA's office in order to determine how we, whether or not we file charges. And it's when we have evidence that meets the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, we file charges. And that's it. And that is what I'm committed to doing. That's what I'm going to do. And we can talk about, yes, we have to hire good police officers. That is a must. And that's something the city has to commit itself. And I commend the Denver Justice Project for their work that they've done with the city to try to address those issues of hiring and of training. But it's three things. It's hiring, it's training, and it's discipline. And the disciplinary role of the DA's office is whether or not we are going to file charges against the police. And in my case, if I don't file charges, you're going to know about it because we're going to have a public fact-finding review, and I'm committed to it, and I'm going to start it on day one. It's important that we bring transparency to how we do business down in the Denver District Attorney's Office so we can restore the trust that has been lost in this community. I want to say one thing. It's not true that we have not charged any law enforcement personnel for felony excessive force. There is no charge of excessive force. There is a charge of assault or something like that that comes out of the use of excessive force. 23 police officers have been filed against during the current administration under Mitch Morrissey. 7 of those cases have come out of the use of coercion or excessive force. The last 3 of those cases that went to trial were not guilty. They were Officer Porter, Officer Cordova, and a Denver Sheriff's deputy who slapped him in the face.
We'll start this question with oftentimes undocumented victims of crime are unwilling to come forward to report crimes for fear of repercussions that might lead to detection by Immigration and Customs Enforcement and or deportation. The federal government implemented the U visa program to protect undocumented victims of certain serious crimes and encourages them to come forward to work with police and prosecutors. One step in this process is called a certification from local law enforcement that a crime victim was helpful, which is a requirement to obtain a U visa. Currently, District Attorney Morrissey is unwilling to sign U visa certifications for undocumented victims of crime in Denver who have assisted in the investigation or the prosecution of certain crimes. What is your position on signing the certification so that undocumented individuals in Denver feel confident to report crimes and assist the DA's office in prosecuting those crimes?
This is a great question. This is wrong. And my opponents have been going out and telling everybody the Denver DA's office doesn't do U visas. They don't do U visas. It's wrong. In 2012, there was an interagency agreement between the mayor's office, the manager of safety, the Denver District Attorney's office, the city attorney's office to come to an agreement to have one agency handle U visas in Denver. And they decided that Scott Snow, who does the victims' work at the Denver Police Department, was the best suited to handle that process. And it was done to make it efficient. It was done to make it so there was one place that folks could go so that they knew where they could get these certifications. And I know it's wrong because I personally have fought for victims of mine and witnesses that I've used in trial so that they can go down and get a U visa. I've made sure of it, and I'll put my record up against anybody because I believe in it. It's critical, it's important. I'll tell you a story. My very first domestic violence trial that I ever did was an undocumented lady from Mexico. And her husband punched her in the face, and she decided that was it, I'd had enough. And she packed up the kids that night, and she left the house. And she did everything we asked her to do. We said, we need to come down and meet with you. She came down and met with us. And she got herself a job because she was supported by her husband, and she went out and she got a job that was flexible enough. And it was unbelievable to watch her. And I was so inspired by watching her, I absolutely went down to the office and I said, this is somebody who we have to be signing a certification for the U visa for. And I've done that on multiple occasions. This is a no-brainer for the Denver DA's office, and it's not true to say that our office doesn't do them.
Well, what we heard was their office doesn't do them because it's sent out to other agencies. And I'm telling you, I've heard from attorneys all over this town about the problem with the U visa in the Denver DA's office. The problem is the system that's been set up is not working. The Denver DA's office should be independently involved in U visa processes. If I'm DA, they will. Because just as Boulder, just as Adams, just as other DA's offices certify U visas, so should Denver. Shouldn't kick that can down the road to someone else. Because right now, the system is delayed, it is stacked, and I've heard complaint after complaint after complaint from attorneys who practice in this area about the system Mr. Boyd talks about. It's not working. What we need is a DA who recognizes that people in our community who are undocumented are targets of many who perpetrate crimes. And they deserve a unit dedicated to protecting them. And if I'm DA, we will have such a unit with a prosecutor who is culturally competent to protect those who take advantage, whether it be wage theft, whether it be sexual predators who go after the undocumented, because they absolutely do. Stan Garnett, who was supporting my campaign, has done wonderful work on this in Boulder. One of the first cases he had was a woman who was being raped by her boss every single day, who told no one cares, you don't have your papers. She heard about the creation of that dedicated unit, went to it, and that man is now in prison. We need such a unit in Denver, and if I'm elected DA, we will have it. Thank you.
Well, I agree with Michael on this one because I have also heard from immigration attorneys that the DA's office is not issuing these not signing the documentation for the U visas, and that it is not working. So I will make sure that the DA's office is intimately involved in this and that we treat victims of crime who are undocumented in a way that encourages them to report crimes and to have trust in the system. I remember the first domestic violence case I handled as a young deputy DA in Denver, and I was talking to the victim who I could still see the marks on her face from an assault. And she said to me, well, I deserved it. And my mouth dropped open. I was pretty young, pretty naive. This was a while ago before there was a lot of talk about domestic violence. And I just couldn't believe it. And I said to her, no one deserves this. She didn't want to go through with the case. And I said, we're going through with this case. So we did. And as a result, I joined the very young group then, which is now the Colorado Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And I learned about how much domestic violence does go on in our communities. And I've continued my involvement and was very happy to be able to have one of my first bills be a bill to give more funding for domestic violence victims. This is a serious crime in our communities, and it is one of my high priority crimes when I become DA to make sure that we do not tolerate these kinds of crimes that threaten our families. Domestic violence, child abuse, sex assault, elder abuse, crimes against the disabled. These are all people who prey on other people and take advantage of their vulnerabilities. And those kinds
Let's talk about facts and let's talk about allocation of resources. Again, it is very easy to sit and promise, but let me tell you what actually happens in the DA's office. What actually happens is if a woman comes to us who is a victim of a domestic violence crime or any other crime and says, do you know about the U visa program? Do you participate? We will tell her. And if we sign off immediately on a U visa, we must, obligated, rules say, disclose that to the defense. And do you know what happens to that woman at trial? That woman at trial has to sit and be accused by very competent defense lawyers that the only reason she is making up these accusations is because she will be allowed to stay in this country. And I'm sorry to tell you, but there are jurors who will listen to that and who will make a decision on her credibility based on xenophobic ideas. It's not right, but it's the facts. So we handle these cases very seriously with great support, but also recognizing we have to do the right thing. So we have a process by which every woman or every man who seeks these are referred to one person in our office who makes the disclosure. Then pursuant to the agreement, that is turned over to the Denver Police Department. Nobody is denied. Nobody. Because they're cooperating. Oh, now I'm not. But I just... And a unit to deal with every undocumented person who comes into our office? City Council, get ready.
Can you hear me? So this is where it gets really exciting. If you have not been paying attention or falling asleep, or you're tired, or you're like, you need to stretch from the rage, just like do this in your seat right now, because this is where you all become the stars and ask the questions that you need to ask. How it's going to work is Jordan is going to be out in the audience taking questions. We have a limited amount of time for questions. We ask that you actually ask a question. Okay? If for some reason it sounds like your voice is not lifting and the question tone is not coming out, Jordan will run. Okay? He's in good shape. He'll just move the mic from you. Okay? Questions short and succinct. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the questions. We'll start the first question with Michael Kerrigan and then do that horseshoe again around.
Can I go with questions first?
Yes. Where are you, Jordan? Okay.
Jordan's right here. Excuse me. My question is, I'd like to, Mr. Kerrigan to comment on Representative Salagar's proposal to have an independent prosecutor review every case of police violence. Whereas I'm not doing justice to it, just how do you feel about an independent prosecutor automatically taking on police violence cases?
So, the DA needs to be accountable to the constituents who elect us. And that means that I believe the DA should be the one to decide when to prosecute a use of excessive force. And I don't believe it's proper for us to kick that significant responsibility to someone else. One thing that's been suggested is a prosecutor from a different jurisdiction should come in and default do that. Again, if we send every case to Jefferson County DA's office, even if they are willing to accept it, then who are you going to vote out next time around if they're not holding the police accountable? So I believe that the current DA should handle those cases. If we have a unit, I would have an open mind to a unit in the AG's office in cases of refusals to prosecute to take a second look. That is something, if it builds public confidence, that is something that I can support. But I believe the first decision, the first investigation, ought to be the DA who's elected. And since I still have some time, I want to address something else. The suggestion that this office doesn't have the resources to do what's right and just. And that's a problem sometimes when we have people who've never worked anywhere else and haven't heard of the community. They may think the U visa system's working great, and that's what I'm hearing. It's not. And we have this, the Denver DA's office has the same resources that prosecutors do in Adams County, in Boulder County, and they find a way to have special units. The Denver DA's office has over 75 lawyers. It's equivalent to the 10th biggest law firm in the state. And with those sort of resources, you can ask certain deputies to take on the sort of specialties that will help them serve our community better. And that's one thing I'll do as DA. And in those appropriate cases, I think it's very important to make sure that there's confidence in how we're handling the use of excessive force.
So I believe that the district attorney is elected to make these kinds of tough decisions. As I mentioned, I have prosecuted a Denver police officer, and if it needs to be done, I will do it. I do think that there may be cases where, for whatever reason, I don't feel that my office can be objective, and it may be a relationship with a particular officer or a situation, And in that kind of situation, I have absolutely no problem having a special prosecutor appointed. I also intend to have a little bit broader look at these cases, perhaps involving the independent monitor who reviews excessive force cases already, but having that person, who is a lawyer, have input into the charging decision, I think would help bring a little bit of an outside perspective. I also think we ought to be looking at whether or not we should have the investigations done by independent or combined team of investigators. I know this is done in some counties where if there is a police homicide, they bring in an outside police agency to do the investigation. And that's something I want to take a look at. You know, Denver is one of the biggest, so it would have to be an agency that has similar expertise, because these are hard cases to investigate. But I think we could perhaps look at bringing in another agency or a combined agency to do the investigation. I also believe that we need much more transparency in this process, so I commit to having community involvement in discussing how decisions are made, what we're looking at, and having community advisors. I spend a lot of time in the community as a state representative, and so I get a lot of great ideas from community involvement, and I would welcome that kind of discussion and transparency with the community. Many of you are here today because of the issue of our office and police accountability. If we are not held accountable for our decisions, and if I can sit up here and say, well, blame Cynthia Kaufman in the AG's office for not charging, I would have charged, then that takes away the power that you have to directly elect the person who you want to do the job that you think is important. So I don't agree with the special prosecutor. I will tell you something that I will do differently when it comes to allegations of police misconduct when either serious bodily injury or other issues have risen. Either the person who is the subject of the interaction, who sustained serious bodily injury, or the police officer. If I make a decision not to file, then ask for a letter. Why am I not filing? And that letter will be available to others. Because as we have seen, we make decisions. I don't know if you know how many decisions we make every day. It's a lot on whether to charge somebody or not to charge somebody. And people aren't aware of why we make those decisions. And it's right for the police officers who are doing their duty and who are falsely accused to have a letter supporting them about why we didn't charge. And it's right for the person who has suffered unlawful interaction to have that letter too, because you need to know. Then you can track our decisions much better. And that goes to the issue of transparency. Let's talk about resources. I'm the chief of the unit with 13 lawyers that handles 12,007 cases a year. The county court division. 1,000 cases per lawyer. Over 800, or almost 800 of those of which are domestic violence cases. They do it because they want to do the right thing. We are not flush with people, let me assure you.
So the independent prosecutor, I agree with what's been said about if you want to have direct accountability to the people, the district attorney's office, or the district attorney who's making that decision should be held accountable for his decision. I will tell you this though, I wouldn't actively lobby against it. And I'll tell you why. Because if that's what the people of the city and county of Denver want for their district attorney's office, that's fine. And I have no problem with that. Because that is what our function is. It's to take what the folks at the legislature have told us, the people of this state want us to do, and for us to implement. And so, I'm not going to actively oppose an independent prosecutor. Do I agree with it? No, I don't. But if the citizens of this state, and if pass a statute and say this is what we want, that's fine with me. We will go on about our work, and we will do it as diligently as we have ever been doing it. But I can assure you, I'm sitting up here as a Democrat, and I don't know how many people sitting in this room would want a Republican like George Brockler coming into their city and county and making the most important decisions on cases that affect them. And that's what you're going to get with an independent prosecutor. Now, this issue about a combined team of investigators, the legislature already passed that you have to have more than one agency investigating this. And guess what? Denver implemented it a couple of months beforehand. They partnered with the Aurora Police Department, and on cases involving police shootings, they now have the Aurora Police Department who is there doing their own independent investigation along with the Denver Police Department. And I fully support it. Denver supported it, and they implemented it before it became law.
In the interest of getting more questions from the community, we are limiting the answers to 1 minute. 1 minute pop quiz, get it out there. All right? We're well prepared. Okay, question from over here.
Yes, my name is Lenny Goldfeather, and I have been to several DA forums, and it's good to see you guys. My question is accountability and transparency. And in my case, my son was having a schizophrenic episode, and the cops were called, and he was shot within a matter of minutes. I heard gunshots, and in front of 18 children. So my question is, are you guys going to start charging the police and holding them accountable? And also, the releasing of the tapes. When they release the tapes, I think when they released the tapes, I saw my son's video the very next day before they released it to the public. They cut out a lot of the tape of the killing that when they killed my son. So the releasing of the tapes is one thing that I am very concerned about. That it needs to be released right away. Not don't give time to cover it up. Another thing is the CIT training. I don't think 40 hours is enough, because some of these guys are coming out of Iraq. The one that killed my son came out of Iraq. He's a sharpshooter, owns a gun store, because him and his father. I know all these things about him, but they need more training. The 40 hours is not enough. And the AOT, Assisted Outpatient Treatment Program, coming from prison, and to reduce the recidivism rate, that would be excellent idea because the more the money is spent on prison. And also, my son was not a statistic. He was someone, and he was a very kind person. And the way the media put him out to be was not very good. But I don't want, I really, really would appreciate it. And if there was no more killings and going unaccountable, nobody's been held accountable. Already one killing already this year. How many more? And I don't want to be a statistic, because another thing is that I am being harassed by the police. They go by my house, and the other families of the murdered victims, they are also being harassed by the police. And I had a gun pointed at me last night by an undercover cop at the place where my son fell. So I say fell. I don't want to say died. And so that happened last night. So the police are harassing me, and that needs to stop too. And so what are you going to do about that? Thank you.
We'll start
Well, I've got 1 minute to answer a long question. Lynn, I appreciated the last time that we were at the Denver DA Forum, because you and I had a moment to stop to speak with each other afterwards. And I told you in that moment that there's nothing worse that a district attorney has to do than to say, there's not enough evidence to go forward on the case. And you and I shared a moment, and I appreciate you taking that time. It is critical that the Denver DA understands what the legal obligations and the ethical obligations are of the office. Too many times we've had people who have died as a result of police killings. It's why the number one thing I talk about is transparency. Because if we don't file something, if we don't file in a case like your son's case, I want to make sure there's a public fact-finding review because it's what you deserve. In terms of releasing tapes and things like that nature, we have to make sure that we keep our investigation, the integrity of our investigation, because the last thing you want to do is not be able to hold those folks accountable if you compromise your investigation.
Thank you.
I feel difficult over the microphones. I've spent 21 years with moms who have lost their kids. And I know there is nothing that I can say that will make it feel better. But I do want to thank you for coming, and I want to thank you for keep talking, and I want to thank you for keeping the memory of what happened to your son alive. Because people who suffer in the way that he did deserve recognition from people. But the really unfortunate thing is we have a pretty limited decision-making process. What we have to decide is, can we prove beyond a reasonable doubt to 12 people an unlawful act was committed? And that is difficult. That is difficult. What I want to do is keep talking to the community about our obligations, about what we do and how we do it. And I agree with you. If there is not one person who loses their life, I gotta wrap it up, who loses their life for the rest of our lifetimes, then that is a good thing for everybody. And I hope we reach that place. And again, thank you for coming today.
First of all, I'm so sorry about the loss of your son. I have a son myself, and I cannot imagine the pain and the agony that you have suffered. Thank you for your courage in continuing to speak on his behalf. I will hold law enforcement officers accountable under the law. I think the community deserves that and demands that. And I also support transparency and release of tapes for the public to see what's happened and why it has happened. We, as a community, need to feel that we can trust the criminal justice system and the DA's office. And I've spent time, when I was manager of safety, the first police shooting we had was a grandmother, actually, who got shot. And I remember talking to her grandchildren and just going up and saying, I'm so sorry. And he said to me, you're the first person in the government who has said they're sorry. So I am sorry, and we will hold people accountable.
Sorry isn't enough. Sorry ain't enough. Do something.
For years.
I share the sympathy for the loss of your son. And what we have to focus on is how we can honor his memory by making a better system. Making a system where people who are having a mental health crisis, like your son, have officers respond with the tools. And clearly 40 hours of training was not enough. That there are other options and other ways to handle these situations. And that's what we have to do. And your question was about accountability, and I think it deserves an answer. And that is, I'm going to hold officers who violate the law and violate the rights of our citizens accountable. But you know who else I'm going to hold accountable? Any officers who give false statements to support those officers. Know the truth much more than we did before. We won't have to take people's word for it because we will have the video. What we saw in Chicago was a national disgrace, where we had a mayor and we had a police chief who were covering, and a DA who fought the release of tape
if a murdered young man and other officers lied to cover it up, if I'm DA, when the case is there, those officers are going to face consequences.
We will start. Hi, I'm an attorney at the Colorado Juvenile Defender Center. We provide free legal services to youth who can't afford an attorney to help them expunge their records and also petition to get off of the registry. We have children as young as 10 on the sex offender registry. Very much defines the rest of their lives. We've received more pushback and objections from the Denver District Attorney than any other jurisdiction in Colorado in cases where there isn't a victim objecting. So if you were elected, what would your position be in supporting those positions and helping those youth find a successful future?
So, first of all, thank you for the work you do. I have worked with the Juvenile Defender Coalition when we passed the bill to provide due process for kids who are facing charges as adults. And I'm very pleased that that bill was passed and signed by the governor and is actually having an impact on this whole using it as a plea bargain. I agree with you that we have too many people on the sex offender registry, particularly those who are young. And I am interested in looking at how we can make that sex offender registry actually be used more appropriately so that people who are dangerous and who are a threat are on the registry. But people like a 10-year-old, I didn't know there was someone as young as 10 on it, who perhaps doesn't have the at that maturity at that time to be put on that registry, that we work on figuring out ways that we can keep those folks from being scarred for life when they are at a young age.
Hi. Of course, every case has to be taken on its merits. And one of our #1 jobs is public safety. I will tell you that as chief of county court, we see petitions to deregister pretty regularly. I've been chief since March. I haven't opposed one. Because my deputies come to me and say they want to deregister. And I say, okay, well, what's happened since the end of the incident? Nothing. What have they done? They've done a job, they've gone to school, they've done this, they've done that. What public service would it support having them to continue to register? None. There you go. There's your answer. So it is not something that I would oppose routinely. As I said, now look at public safety. You've got to look at each case on a case-by-case basis, and we'll make a decision on how is society best served. And society includes the person who is on the register.
This is a great question. When I was in juvenile court, I was one of the first deputies to put a sex offender in our juvenile diversion program. I was one of the first kids that they accepted in that program. The reason why I did it and why I thought it was appropriate was because that child had been perpetrated on, and he was mimicking things that had happened in his own life, and unspeakable things. So I had that experience. And I also had the experience of the public safety aspect, because I spent 3 years specializing in crimes against children, primarily sex assault on children. And I know how awful it can be from a public safety deal to have that happen. It comes down to common sense. That's what it comes down to. When folks are trying to get off the registry, what makes common sense? Like Helen said, if they've been doing what they've been supposed to be doing, then why are we opposing it? If there's some valid reasons for opposing it, then in those particular cases, we will continue to oppose it.
So one thing you heard a lot from the panel today that preceded us, and a lot from the audience, is the incredible discretion that the DA has. And what I want to emphasize today, how important it is to have the person at the top have a balanced perspective. Because the person at the top isn't going to be seeing those specific motions for deregistry. But setting the tenor with all the deputy DAs all the way down, that discretion should be used for one reason, to advance justice. Justice means to protect public safety, but also to recognize when blunt tools like the registry need to be used appropriately. And that's why it's really important that as an ex-DA, You choose someone who has broad experience, who has worked other places, who's worn different hats, who's played different roles in the criminal justice system and in our civil justice system. Because that's when you have the deputies who are making those day-to-day decisions, recognizing the true power of their discretion and doing what's right.
Jones. And my question goes back again to the accountability and transparency. With everything that's been happening in the last, I'm going to say 5 years, at every meeting I have come to, they say accountability or transparency. I need to know exactly what is your definition of transparency and how are you going to hold the mayor, when you meet with them, to push him to release films so that the public can see actually what's going on.
It's not that you're not interested, but you've been here a long time. Well, Mayor Hancock makes his own decisions. What I will say is, if you don't think we've got a problem, Mayor Hancock, with people understanding what we do, then you weren't here today.
It is a public term. We will issue a letter if we don't charge, saying why we don't charge. The officer can request a letter, and the person who's making the accusation. We don't do that now. We're going to do it. And we're going to track the number of cases we see, we're going to track the number of cases we charge, and we're going to track the number of cases we don't charge. And as it relates to,
so I'll give you the definition. It's the definition comes from statutes, and the definition comes from the ethical standards of the American Bar Association. That whenever I have evidence that meets the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, I will charge. When my opponent, Michael Kerrigan, says, when I have a case, I'll charge the officer. That's what he means, because we are governed by the law, we are governed by the ethical standards of the prosecutors. Now, what do I mean by transparency? Transparency is a public fact-finding review. This is not something crazy that I came up with one night and sat up and said, oh, I'm going to do this. This is something that they've been doing out in Clark County, Nevada. And I had the opportunity to go out there and meet with the district attorney, the assistant district attorney who runs that program, and talk to them. They've been doing it on every police-involved killing since 2013, and that's what it is, and that's what I want to bring to Denver.
Right now, letters are issued. There was a letter issued to the Marvin Booker. How many of you fully understand how that decision was reached? We have to do more than issue a piece of paper. We have to have a conversation. We have to have a conversation before we have instances like that, and we need to have conversations when those decisions are made. So what I have talked about, transparency and accountability, it's not just a buzzword for me. Because if you do not trust how the office is making decisions, my deputies are going to lose cases. And I know it because it happened to me when I was a prosecutor in Denver, where I had jurors send a message because they didn't like the Denver Police Department by sending some not guilty verdicts. And we need to build that trust. So if I'm DA, I will not only issue a written decision, not only fatality but other cases, but then I will come out in the public and I will answer the press's question, and I'll answer your questions. You may not agree with me, but you will understand how I made the decision, and we will have a conversation. I can't even hear.
So we must allow the last candidate to answer and move on to the next two people with questions. Thank you very much. Ma'am, there's no microphone near you, so we have to follow the order of the microphone. Thank you very much.
Be happy to talk to you when we're done. Please come find me.
So, the question about releasing the videos, transparency, I believe that we should be releasing.
We don't do that now. We're going to do it. track the number of cases we see, we're going to track the number of cases we charge, and we're going to track the number of cases we don't charge. And as it relates to, and now I need to wrap it up. Thank you. Sorry.
So I'll give you the definition. It's the definition comes from the statutes, and the definition comes from the ethical standards of the American Bar Association that whenever I have evidence that meets the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, I will charge. And my opponent, Michael Kerrigan, says, when I have a case, I'll charge the officer. That's what he means, because we are governed by the law, we are governed by the ethical standards of prosecutors. Now, what do I mean by transparency? Transparency is a public fact-finding review. This is not something crazy that I came up with one night and sat up and said, oh, I'm going to do this. This is something that they've been doing out in Clark County, Nevada. And I had the opportunity to go out there and meet with the district attorney, the assistant district attorney who runs that program, and talk to him. They've been doing it on every police-involved killing since 2013. And that's what it is, and that's what I want to bring to Denver.
Right now, letters are issued. There was a letter issued in the Marvin Booker case. How many of you fully understand how that decision was reached? We have to do more than issue a piece of paper. We have to have a conversation. We have to have a conversation before we have instances like that, and we need to have conversations when those decisions are made. So what I've talked about, transparency and accountability, it's not just a buzzword for me. Because if you do not trust how the office is making the decisions, my deputies are going to lose cases. And I know it because it happened to me when I was a prosecutor in Denver, where I had jurors send a message because they didn't like the Denver Police Department by sending some not guilty verdicts. And we need to build that trust. So if I'm DA, I will not only issue a written decision, not only in fatalities but in other cases, but then I will come out in the public and I will answer the press's question, I'll answer your questions. You may not agree with me, but you will understand how I made the decision, and we will have a conversation.
Are you including camo cams and all of the other footage that's being held out to people? Yeah.
I can't even hear.
I said, are you including the camo cams and all video footage? Because it's being left out. What happened to Jessica Hernandez was live, and it was held out. And so you may not have an atrocity. Sorry for interrupting. You may not have an atrocity, but the protesters, what I was saying about people and the accusations to be done by the cops.
So we must allow the last candidate to answer and move on to the next two people who have questions. Thank you very much. Ma'am, there's no microphone near you, so we have to follow the order of the microphone. Thank you very much.
Be happy to talk to you when we're done. Please come find me.
So, the question about releasing the videos and transparency, I believe that we should be releasing the videos right away. And the DA's office certainly can go to the mayor and say, we don't think the release of this video is going to compromise our case. And that's generally the basis on which the mayor says we're not going to release, is because the DAs or the police are saying it will compromise the investigation. So the DA certainly has a role to play in deciding whether or not to release the videos. That case I mentioned previously where a grandmother was shot when I was manager of safety, we had a press conference within a week to talk about what happened. We didn't have all the video that we have now, but we certainly had a press conference where we discussed exactly what happened and what happened with that shooting. I believe that the public deserves to know what happens when particularly when there are police-involved shootings. And I also believe that we need to be transparent when we make the decisions that we make and inform the public about what the basis is for our decisions either way.
For two more questions, I'm going to let Jordan work that out for you. And we're going to start this question with Ken and Boyd and go back around the horseshoe.
As a measure of increasing accountability and reducing racial profiling, would you support a requirement for officers to announce at the time they call in their traffic stops what their probable cause is for the stop? That's not currently done. All they do is say, we've made a stop at a particular location, and here's the license plate number. We want you to run a check on it.
Sure. I think that proposition posed to me. There's no reason why I would oppose it. Again, this comes to really police and what they're doing on the streets. They have a very specific way in which they interact with the radio. There's a specific way in which they interact with dispatch to make it efficient and also to make sure that everybody knows what's happening. Because when you have a critical incident that's going on, if you have several people who are on the microphone and speaking for long periods of time, you're also interrupting the ability of other people to use those. I don't see any reason why that would be an issue. I don't see why there would be a problem with that.
Much like Kenneth, when you suggested that, the first thing that came to my mind is that is very interesting. I will tell you because, as you know, there either has to be probable cause or reasonable articulable suspicion for an officer to pull somebody over. Do we lose anything as a DA's office by having the officer do that? No, absolutely not. In fact, in many cases, I think it would help us when later stops are challenged. The difficulty will be in certain situations in whether or not there is time to do that and still act for the officer's safety and for the safety of people around the officer. A traffic stop can turn very deadly very quickly. So I am loath to put obligations that may put either citizen or officer safety at risk. But I think it is certainly worth a conversation. And as I said, I've never heard that idea before, and I'm very open to it.
And I also am open to the idea of having the officer state the probable cause. I think that we have seen through data that's been collected that there often are stops that perhaps don't have probable cause, and I doubt there are any young African American men in the audience who haven't been stopped, because everyone I've talked to and all my friends in that situation have been stopped when they don't feel there is probable cause. So we have been talking about the whole racial profiling issue at the Capitol. There was a committee that worked on it over the summer, and it is difficult to collect good data, and that's been one of the things that we've been talking about. And so it's an interesting idea to actually have the officer state at the time of the stop what the probable cause is. So I would like to explore that further.
I like it. Listen, police officers have codes for everything, right? So they could probably fit most of the traffic stops in about 10 different codes as to the reason for their stop. Matthew, I want you to stand up. This is Matthew, who's working on my campaign. He goes to UNC. He lives up in Greeley. He found himself getting stopped all the time by the Greeley Police Department. You know what he did to make the stop? He tinted his windows. He didn't drive any safer. He didn't drive any slower. He tinted his windows. How is someone like Matthew going to have confidence in our criminal justice system if he's getting stopped because of how he looks? So we have to track that, and we need to track that. And again, I'm going to invoke my father's legacy again, because he was the federal judge who ruled it was illegal to stop motorists driving through Eagle County because of their race and searching for drugs. And he suppressed evidence when the Eagle County Sheriff, when it was determined that half the people they were stopping were Latino and half were African American. And he kicked it out. And he kicked it out in the honor and cited Martin Luther King in his decision. And that's where we have to gather this data and learn the answers.
So we actually have two more questions. A person over here got Jordan a promise. So we're going to start with this question, and we're going to start with Michael Kerrigan.
That's it. Yes, and when we have a video that shows there was no action toward the police at all, and then you have a report that says, oh, he lunged at me, or he threatened me, or I was scared from the officers. They contradict each other. How are you going to rule on that? And I think the citizen needs the benefit of the doubt, not the police.
Thank you. Your question is not hypothetical. We had that here in Denver. We had that with the Waller case, where we had a shackled man standing in the courtroom in front of Judge Doris Bird, who I practiced in front of and really respect, trying to ask her a question and was thrown into a wall. And there was no charges brought. The other officers gave a statement saying he fell. Judge Bird, who is not pro-defense, Judge Bird filed a complaint, but the Denver DA's office did not. And they didn't issue a report. And it took Judge Martinez calling them and asking for, demanding an answer, only to find out that the charges that could have been filed had passed through the statute of limitations. And that is a problem. We will get more and more video. We will know the answers objectively. And our system isn't going to change until not only the officers who violate people's rights are prosecuted and held accountable, but also the other officers who lie to protect them.
So Michael kind of stole my thunder. I was actually in the courtroom when Judge Martinez ruled that there should have been charges brought by the district attorney in that case. Because having watched the video myself, I couldn't understand why there were not at least assault charges brought against that sheriff's deputy. It was an egregious situation. And when we have a video that disputes what the statements are from the officers, that is very powerful evidence. And we cannot continue to allow officers to protect each other by making misstatements. The Civil Service Commission, I can't understand how they did this, but they reversed the firing of a sheriff's deputy and made a statement about, well, this is not a, we can't expect them to always tell the truth kind of thing. And I was just stunned by that, because that, when you take the oath to be truthful, if you can't rely on officers to tell the truth, the whole system falls apart.
I understood your question to be, if an officer claims that somebody has attacked them and that is their justification for inflicting force upon them in some way, and a video shows that that is a false claim, what would you do? And the answer is, I would charge that officer with the assault that was committed because it was unjustified. That's what I understood your question to be, and that's my answer.
So, two issues here, because we have, and I agree with Helen, and I commend the Denver Police Department on going in the direction that they're headed. They just started implementing body-worn cameras, which is going to be a great thing, because I can assure you that as prosecutors, we want to know what happened. We have to know what happened in order to make the critical decisions that we have to. If an officer says he lunged at me, and the video shows he doesn't lunge at me, he's going to get charged with the assault. If you have an officer who is writing a statement then and is not telling the truth, if you look at the bottom of the Denver Police Department statements, they are swearing under oath to those truths. And so that opens up the possibility that you can try somebody on perjury charges for that particular offense.
Hi, I'm Shrai Kendall's aunt, and I have a question. The question I need to know is, when a police officer has more than one excessive force within a 4-month period of time, what would you do? That's the question. So we'll start with which was you.
Okay. Well, I guess the question, it will depend on the facts of the case, because as the district attorney, we don't have disciplinary authority over police officers. When I was manager of safety, we did have disciplinary power, and we looked at excessive officers who had more than one excessive force complaint, and that can be the grounds for discipline against the officer. In terms of filing a case, Again, we have to look at whether or not there was a violation of the law, and if there was, the officer would clearly be held accountable. So it's, one of the things I think the DA's office needs to do better is the relationship with the police department. Right now, our district attorney and our police chief do not get along very well, and they've had some public spats in the newspapers. I think if you have an issue, you sit down with the police chief and you talk about it, and you say, this is an officer that we have seen a history with. You need to do something about this officer. So it needs to be done.
So it is true that excessive force is not a crime. There's no definition that says excessive force. It's assault. That's a crime. So if I have an officer who is charged and there are taken facts to warrant a criminal charge twice in 4 months, I'm certainly going to be calling the chief of police and asking why he or she is still on the street. Because that individual is going to create liability. So that's if there's enough to bring 2 criminal charges, which obviously would be shocking. I would hopefully take immediate action. But if it's not, then the DA also needs to make sure that the disciplinary process and speaking out and using the bully pulpit, because the DA cannot hire and fire officers, but the DA can be a conscious and a loud voice calling for reform to make sure that those officers who are the repeat offenders, the repeat abusers, are held accountable and they're off the force, because most of the officers don't want them there either.
So the charging decision is made as every other charging decision is. If there's evidence to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, you charge them. And that's the answer to that question. In terms of the administrative part of it, or the disciplinary process of it, that is something that's handled by the independent monitor, by the manager of safety, and the chief of police. And so, again, I agree with Michael on this one. This is an issue where we have to do better in looking at patterns of stress among officers, patterns of the use of force to make people aware that this is going on. When we had the budget shortfall for so many years, those officers were, we had officers covering large amounts of area where they normally would have had many officers, and that increases stress. It increases, and they're human. They're going to respond to stress in negative ways. And if we can do that, that is a responsibility of the DA's office if we start seeing those patterns.
Even the cops that were fired were rehired with back pay, vacation pay.
I understood your question, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if someone is alleged to have committed an act that involves excessive force or an assault, and then has another separate allegation within a short period of time, what should we do? Did I understand your question correctly? Okay, and somebody was charged or somebody was not charged, first time or second time, in your hypothetical? So my answer to that would be, as much as others have dismissed this idea, when allegations are made that somebody has committed an assault and it involves either serious bodily injury or it involves other public interest, the officer or the person doing the accusation can request a letter from our office if we decide not to charge. So, for example, the public would know if somebody had that allegation against them more than once in a short period of time. I think that that's the first step. If people are charged, obviously if someone is charged with assault, I'm not quite sure why they're still there, and certainly should not be there for a second period. It's hard in a minute, really hard to answer that, but that's enough. Thank you.
So clearly we're all passionate about these issues, which is why we're here. I want to thank the candidates for being here today. I want to thank the community members for being here today to find out how
power, privilege, policy, government, structure work in our community. I'm sure you all keep pressing on to get the answers to the questions that you have, and I'm sure the candidates would invite having you talk to them afterwards. I'm going to pass it on to Alex to close.
So I just have a couple of announcements to make. For one, I want to again thank Trinity United Methodist for opening up their space to us. And I also want to thank the folks who were able to translate this entire forum into Spanish. And that goes out to Annabelle Cuardos Yacer and Laura Gonzalez Pigman. They are also available for upcoming events. If anybody here would like to communicate with them for something that you're hosting individually, please don't hesitate to reach out. I also would like to just raise an announcement about